I was making soup when my daughter-in-law hit me over the head with a ladle. "Who cooks like this, you incompetent old woman?" Tiffany screamed, and I felt the hot metal scorch my temple. My son, Marcus, sat in the living room and simply turned up the volume on the television, as if he couldn't hear, as if it didn't matter. 5 minutes later, a deafening crash came from the kitchen, pots, plates, and my body hitting the floor. Marcus finally ran in and stood paralyzed in the doorway. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered, staring at me sprawled out amidst the wreckage of my own dignity. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that I still had one last card hidden away, a card that would change everything. My name is Eleanor Sterling, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 71 years old, with hands calloused from decades of working in kitchens, and a heart that until recently had foolishly placed all its faith in family loyalty. How foolish I was, how utterly blind. 6 months ago, I buried my husband, Wallace. 50 years of marriage just evaporated on an April afternoon when his heart decided to quit while he was watering the azaleas in the backyard. I found him there on his knees, the hose still dripping water onto his brown shoes. Since that day, my world became silence and yellowing photographs. I was left alone in a house that was too big, surrounded by memories that hurt to touch. Marcus, my only child, insisted I move in with him and his wife. "You can't be alone, Mom. It's dangerous at your age," he said, sounding worried over the phone. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So, I packed my life into 4 suitcases and left behind the house where I'd raised my son, where Wallace and I used to dance in the kitchen on Sundays, where every corner held pieces of us. Marcus's house was all modern chic, with blinding floors and furniture that looked straight out of an Architectural Digest spread. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, greeted me with a smile that looked about as genuine as a $3 bill. "Welcome, Eleanor," she said, without calling me mother or mom. Just Eleanor, like I was a stranger. From day one, I knew I'd made a mistake, but it was too late to turn back. I settled into the guest room, a small space at the end of the hall with a window overlooking a dark alley. I hung Wallace's photographs on the wall, arranged my gray dresses in the closet, and tried to make myself invisible. That was my new role, to exist without being a burden. The morning started early. I was up by 6 a.m., brewing coffee, making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh squeezed orange juice. Marcus came down first, always rushing, always looking at his phone. "Thanks, Mom," he'd mumble without glancing up. Tiffany appeared afterward, wrapped in a silky green robe, her hair perfectly styled even at that hour. She'd sit down and scrutinize every detail of my work with critical eyes. "The coffee's weak," she'd say, or "these eggs have way too much salt." Never a thank you, never a word of appreciation. I just nodded, smiled, and tried again the next day. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to believe I still had a place in my son's life. Days bled into weeks. I cleaned, I cooked, I did the laundry. I became a shadow moving through the house, picking up crumbs, folding towels, tidying spaces no one else seemed to notice. Tiffany worked from home, always on important calls, always stressed. When something went wrong in her day, I was the easiest target. "Why did you leave this here?" she'd yell, pointing at a mug I'd forgotten on the side table. "You can't do anything right." Marcus was present for those moments, but he never said anything. He just looked away, as if it wasn't his problem, as if I wasn't his mother. There were nights I stayed awake, listening to the wall clock tick every second. I wondered what I had done wrong, where I had failed as a mother, why my son allowed me to be treated that way. The tears fell silently onto my pillow, and I dried them before dawn because I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't give them a reason to discard me. But that afternoon, while I was preparing the vegetable beef soup that Marcus loved so much as a boy, something in me snapped. I was chopping carrots, focused on making everything perfect, when Tiffany stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. "What are you doing?" she demanded, in that sharp tone I knew too well. "Soup for dinner," I replied softly, without turning around. "Marcus's favorite recipe." She walked closer, looked into the pot, and her face twisted in disgust. This looks like pig slop. How much salt did you use? Are you trying to poison us?" Her words were daggers. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She grabbed the metal ladle from the pot and, before I could react, slammed it against my head. The blow left me stunned. I felt the heat of the metal, the boiling liquid dripping down my hair, the sharp pain in my temple. "Who cooks like this, you incompetent old woman?" Tiffany shouted, her voice echoing through the whole house. I stumbled, holding on to the edge of the stove. From the living room, I heard the TV. Marcus was right there. He could hear everything, and all he did was turn up the volume. That was the moment something inside me just died. The physical pain was nothing compared to the betrayal in that silence. My son, the boy I carried, the child I raised with every ounce of love I had, chose the sound of a TV show over my suffering. I stayed there, leaning against the stove, the ladle still dripping soup at my feet. Tiffany stared at me with those eyes full of contempt, waiting for me to apologize, to kneel, to beg her forgiveness for existing. But all I could think about was Marcus, how the TV volume had spiked right when she screamed, how he knew exactly what was happening and chose not to see it. "You're pathetic," Tiffany spat, crossing her arms. "Look at this mess. You can't even make soup right. I don't know why Marcus insisted on bringing you here. You're a burden, a useless woman who just takes up space." Every word was a slap. I wanted to answer, to defend myself, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my throat. I tried to clean up, wiping the soup drops from the floor, but my hands were shaking. My head was throbbing where the ladle had struck. Tiffany stormed out, and I was left alone in the steam and the silence. 5 minutes. That was all it took for me to make a decision. I looked at the pots lined up on the stove. I looked at the dishes piled in the rack. I looked at the kitchen I had cleaned every day for months, trying to earn a place in this house that was never truly mine. And something inside me just exploded. It wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It was pure survival instinct. I grabbed the biggest pot, the one that held the soup she'd criticized, and emptied it into the sink. The hot liquid went down the drain with a sound that was almost violent. Then I grabbed another pot, and another. I dropped them, some on the floor, others against the kitchen counter. Plates slipped from my hands, cups shattered, silverware flew into the air. It was a chaotic, liberating, necessary racket. I heard Marcus's hurried steps. "What was that?" he yelled from the hallway. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped dead in his tracks. His face went pale seeing me there, surrounded by overturned pots, spilled soup, broken dishes. There was a thin line of blood on my temple where the ladle had hit. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered. But he didn't come closer. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me as if I were the one to blame for everything. Tiffany appeared behind him, her look of horror quickly turning to rage. "She's insane! Your mother is completely out of her mind!" she shrieked, pointing at me like I was a dangerous animal. "Look at this mess! She destroyed my whole kitchen! Call someone, Marcus! This woman needs to be locked up!" Marcus looked at me. I looked back, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, or at least to ask why I had done this. But he just shook his head, disappointed, ashamed. "Mom, why? Why do you do these things?" "Why?" I repeated, my voice sounding hoarse and broken. "Your wife hit me with a scalding hot ladle, Marcus. She hit me, and you turned up the TV." The words came out like knives. He blinked, confused, or perhaps pretending to be confused. "I didn't hear it, Mom. I didn't know." "Liar." The word floated between us like poison. "You were right there. You heard the whole thing, and you chose to do nothing." Tiffany stepped between us, her face red with fury. "I will not tolerate this. I will not live under the same roof as this ungrateful old woman who respects nothing. Marcus, you have to choose. Either she goes, or I go." The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I looked at my son, begging him with my eyes to choose me, to remember who raised him, who spent sleepless nights when he had a fever, who worked 2 jobs to pay for his college. But Marcus stared at the floor, his hands in his pockets, defeated. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally murmured. "But I think I think it's better if you find somewhere else. This isn't working. You're causing problems. You need to leave." The world stopped. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your wife hits me and you kick me out?" "It's not like that, Mom. It's just that Tiffany and I need our space. You need your independence. It'll be better for everyone." He spoke in rehearsed phrases, empty words someone else had put in his mouth. My son wasn't there anymore. All that was left was a stranger with his face. "When?" I asked, feeling the tears start to burn behind my eyes. "Tomorrow morning. I'll call you a cab. You can stay at a hotel while you find something permanent. I'll help with some of the expenses, at first." He was firing me like an employee. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Wallace's photographs, wondering what he would say if he could see me now. I packed my things slowly, folding each item with care, as if external order could contain the internal chaos. At dawn, I heard the cab honk. Marcus waited at the door with $200 in his hand. "To get you settled," he said, unable to hold my gaze. I didn't hug him. I didn't say goodbye. I just took the money, grabbed my bags, and walked out of that house without looking back. The cab driver asked where I wanted to go. I had no answer. "Just to any cheap motel," I finally said. He took me to a roadside motel with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled like stale beer and desperation. The room cost $30 a night. I did the math in my head. With $200, I could survive less than 1 week. The hotel room was small, with stained beige walls and a bed that squeaked every time I moved. The window overlooked the parking lot, where cars came and went at all hours of the night. The neon sign light flashed every few seconds, bathing everything in a sickly reddish glow. I sat on that bed, and for the first time in months, I cried without holding back. They weren't silent tears. They were deep, heaving sobs that clawed their way out of a dark place in my chest, years of accumulated pain, swallowed humiliation, unsaid words. I cried for Wallace, who had left me alone in a world I no longer recognized. I cried for Marcus, the boy who once hugged me and called me his hero. I cried for myself, for the woman I had been and who now didn't know who she was. When the tears dried, only emptiness remained. I looked in the bathroom mirror under the cruel fluorescent light. A 71-year-old woman stared back. Deep wrinkles, swollen eyes, messy gray hair. There was a purple mark on my temple where the ladle had struck. I touched the wound gently and felt that the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the other pain, the one that had no name. The days began to blur. I stayed in the room the entire time, watching TV without really seeing it, eating minimally. I only went out to buy something from the vending machine in the hall: salty crackers, instant coffee, granola bars. Once, the machine ate my last $2 without giving me anything back. I stood there watching the money disappear and felt it was a perfect metaphor for my life. I sent messages to Marcus. At first, I tried to maintain my dignity. "Son, I need to talk to you." Nothing. Then I tried to be more direct. "Marcus, I'm running out of money." Silence. Finally, I stopped trying. The messages were marked as read, but there was never a reply. It was like shouting into a bottomless well. 1 week later, the money was gone. The desk clerk, a man in his 40s with a prominent belly and tired eyes, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I need you to pay or check out." His voice wasn't cruel, just professional, indifferent. I explained my situation. I begged for one more day, but he just shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am. Rules are rules." I packed my suitcases again. 4 suitcases that now weighed like corpses. I dragged them across the parking lot under a scorching sun with nowhere to go. I walked for hours. My feet ached, my hands blistered from carrying so much weight, but I kept going because stopping meant accepting that I had nowhere to land. I ended up at a small park near downtown. There were metal benches beneath the trees, pigeons pecking at crumbs, children playing on the swings. I sat on a secluded bench and watched life continue as if I didn't exist. A woman walked by with her young daughter. The little girl looked at me with curiosity, but her mother yanked her hand and quickened her pace, as if poverty were contagious. That was my first night sleeping on the street. I didn't truly sleep. I stayed sitting up, clutching my purse, startled by every noise. There were other unhoused people in the park, mostly men, huddled under cardboard. One of them approached and offered me a piece of stale bread. "Eat up, Grandma. You gotta look out for yourself out here." I took the bread with trembling hands and thanked him. He nodded and walked away, dragging a bag full of cans. The days turned into a routine of survival. I looked for food in the dumpsters behind restaurants. At first, I was disgusted, ashamed. But hunger is stronger than pride. I found day-old bread, bruised fruit, scraps people had left on their plates. I ate hidden in alleys where no one could see me. There was a church a few blocks away that served soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I stood in line with dozens of other people, all with broken stories written on their faces. A young volunteer served me the bowl with a compassionate smile that made me feel even smaller. "God bless you, ma'am," she would say. I just nodded, unable to form words. The nights were the worst, cold, long, and full of fear. I lay down on the bench with my suitcases around me, using my sweater as a blanket. I listened to sirens in the distance, occasional shouts, the constant hum of the city that never slept. I thought of Marcus, lying in his comfortable bed, in his heated house, while I shivered under the stars. I wondered if he thought of me, if he cared, if he knew his mother was sleeping rough. One morning, a patrol officer woke me with his flashlight. "Ma'am, you can't be here. You need to move on." I explained I had nowhere to go. He sighed, tired of hearing stories like mine. "There's a shelter 6 blocks over. Go there." He gave me the address and left. I tried to go, but the shelter was full. "Come back early tomorrow," they told me. Always tomorrow, always waiting. Never now. 2 weeks passed like that, or maybe 3. I lost count. The days blurred into a fog of exhaustion and hopelessness. My clothes were dirty, my hair greasy, my skin covered in grime. I had become one of those invisible people whom others avoid making eye contact with, a statistic, a shadow. But in the midst of all that suffering, something strange happened. I started remembering things I had forgotten. I remembered that before I married Wallace, I wanted to study literature. I remembered winning a poetry contest in school once. I remembered there was a time when I had dreams of my own before I became a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a shadow. One afternoon, while searching through my suitcases for clean clothes, I found an envelope I didn't remember packing. It was old, yellowed, with my name written in Wallace's unmistakable handwriting. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were a letter and several folded documents. The letter began, "My dearest Ellie." I recognized immediately when he had written it. It was from 2 years ago when Wallace had been hospitalized with pneumonia. I thought it had just been a scare, but now I understood that he had faced his own mortality. "If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer with you," the letter said. "Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive. I always wanted to shield you from the worries of money, business, and legal complexities, but now I see it was a mistake to keep you in the dark." My eyes filled with tears as I read. Wallace's voice resonated in every word. "For the last 30 years, I made investments, small at first, then larger. I bought properties when no one wanted them, in neighborhoods that later gained serious value. I saved every extra penny. I did it all thinking of our future, of your security. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry, because I wanted to surprise you in our old age with the peace of knowing you would be well cared for." My breathing quickened. I unfolded the documents that came with the letter. They were deeds, property titles, investment certificates. My eyes scanned the papers, unable to believe what I was seeing. An apartment building downtown, another one on the north side, company stocks, bank accounts with numbers that seemed impossible. My hands were shaking so much the papers nearly fell to the ground. I read each document once, twice, 3 times, trying to process the information. There were 13 properties in my name. 13. Complete buildings, apartments, commercial spaces. And one of those addresses was painfully familiar. 452 Magnolia Avenue. It was the building where Marcus and Tiffany lived. The building where they had kicked me out, where I had been humiliated, struck, and discarded like trash. It was mine. It had been mine the entire time. I felt something churning in my stomach. It wasn't just surprise. It was a mix of disbelief, hurt, and something darker that was slowly starting to grow. Wallace's letter continued on the second page. Contact the attorney Avery Hayes. He has all the original documents and will help you with everything. His number is at the end of this letter. Ellie, my love, never let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are a strong, capable, valuable woman. If anyone treats you wrong, remember, you have the power to defend yourself. I loved you every day of my life. Take care of yourself. Wally. I sat on that park bench, surrounded by my bags, holding proof that I wasn't the homeless woman everyone saw passing by. I owned an estate valued at approximately $10 million. $10 million. And I had been sleeping on the street, eating from the garbage, begging for crumbs. The irony was so brutal I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. I laughed like a maniac, while tears streamed down my dirty cheeks. Passers-by looked at me with pity or fear, steering clear of the crazy old woman in the park. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I was, but now I knew something they didn't. I searched through my things until I found a working payphone. I dialed attorney Avery Hayes' number with shaky fingers. It rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. Hayes & Associates Law Firm. How may I help you? I need to speak to attorney Avery Hayes. It's about Wallace Sterling. My voice was hoarse, broken from weeks of barely using it. There was a pause. Who is calling, please? It's Eleanor Sterling, Wallace's widow. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Sterling, we've been trying to contact you for months. Where are you? Mr. Hayes needs to see you urgently. I gave them the address of the park. They said they would send a car in less than 30 minutes. I returned to my bench and waited, clinging to those documents as if they were the only real thing in the world. Maybe they were. The car that arrived was black, sleek, with tinted windows. The driver got out and looked at me with a neutral, professional expression, as if picking up unhoused women was part of his daily routine. Mrs. Sterling? I nodded. He loaded my bags into the trunk and opened the back door for me. The interior smelled like leather and expensive air freshener. I felt dirty, out of place, but I no longer cared. The law firm was in the financial district, in one of those glass buildings that reflected the sky. We rode a silent elevator up to the 15th floor. The receptionist looked me up and down, but didn't say anything, just pointed down a hallway. Attorney Hayes is waiting for you in his office. Avery Hayes was a man in his 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He stood up when I entered, and for a second, I saw surprise on his face at my condition. But he quickly replaced it with a professional expression. Mrs. Sterling, please have a seat. Can I offer you water? Coffee? Water, please. My voice was barely a whisper. He poured a glass from a crystal carafe and handed it to me. I drank as if I hadn't had water in days, which in a way was true. Mrs. Sterling, we have been trying to locate you since Mr. Sterling passed away. We left messages at your old house. We sent letters. Your son told us you had moved out, but he didn't provide a contact address. My son. The words came out bitter. My son kicked me out of his house 3 weeks ago. I've been living on the street. The attorney frowned. I see. I am truly sorry to hear that. But I want you to know that your financial situation is very solid. Your husband was an extremely foresighted man. Have you reviewed the documents he left you? I pulled the envelope from my purse and placed it on his desk. I found them yesterday. I don't understand everything they say. Avery reviewed them carefully, nodding. These are duplicates. I have the certified originals here. Allow me to explain your current situation. Mrs. Sterling, you own 13 properties in the city valued at approximately $10 million in total. Additionally, you have investments in funds and stocks worth $2 million more. Your husband also left you 3 bank accounts with available cash of approximately $500,000. The numbers floated in the air like something unreal. $12.5 million. And I had been searching for food in dumpsters. It can't be real, I whispered. It is completely real, Mrs. Sterling. And there's something else you should know. One of the buildings you own is at 452 Magnolia Avenue. According to our records, your son Marcus Sterling and his wife Tiffany occupy apartment 301 in that building. Is that correct? I nodded slowly. That is correct. Then you should know that they have been living there under a reduced rent contract that your husband granted them 5 years ago. They pay barely $400 a month for an apartment that would be worth $2,500 in the market. It was a family favor that Mr. Sterling granted them. $400. Marcus was paying $400 to live in a luxury apartment thanks to his father's generosity, and he had thrown me out onto the street. He had left me with nothing. The attorney continued speaking, explaining details about taxes, property management, but I was barely listening. My mind was processing something else. Can I cancel that contract? I asked, interrupting him suddenly. Avery stopped and looked at me intently. You are the owner, Mrs. Sterling. You can do whatever you want with your properties. However, there are legal procedures we must follow. You can't simply kick them out without notice. I don't want to kick them out yet. The words came out cold, calculated. I want them to adjust their rent to market price, $2,500. Tell them to pay that. The attorney nodded slowly. That is within your rights. We would have to notify them 30 days in advance about the change in contract terms. Are you sure you want to proceed? Completely sure. Avery took notes on his computer. Very well. I will prepare the necessary documents. Now, Mrs. Sterling, there are more immediate matters we must attend to. Your living situation, for example. You have several options. You can move into any of your vacant properties, or I can help you find a temporary place while you decide what to do. I want to see the other buildings, all of them. I want to know exactly what I own. Of course. We can organize viewings starting tomorrow. In the meantime, allow me to arrange a hotel room for you, an appropriate place where you can rest and recover. He stood up and made a call. In minutes, everything was coordinated. A 5-star hotel downtown, an executive suite, everything paid for from my own account. Before I left, Avery handed me a bank card. This has access to one of your checking accounts. There's $50,000 available for immediate expenses. Use what you need. And Mrs. Sterling, one more thing. Your husband asked me to tell you something if you ever came to see me under difficult circumstances. He made me promise. He pulled a sealed envelope from a drawer. He told me, word for word, if my Ellie comes to you beaten down by life, give her this and tell her I always knew she was stronger than she believed. I took the envelope with hands that no longer trembled so much. I opened it right there in front of Attorney Hayes. It was another letter from Wallace, this one shorter, written in black ink on thick paper. My love, if you are reading this, it means someone hurt you enough that you sought help. I know your pride. I know how hard it is for you to ask for anything, but I want you to know one thing. I built this for you. Every property, every investment, every penny saved was with the day in mind when I would be gone and you would need to defend yourself. Do not let anyone, not even our own blood, make you feel small. You are a giant, Ellie. You always were. Now prove it. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read. Avery had the delicacy to look away, pretending to review papers. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away with the other. Wallace had known. Somehow, he had known that one day I would need this, that I would need a shield, armor, a castle of my own. The hotel was everything my life had ceased to be. Soft carpets, sheets that smelled of lavender, a bathroom with a marble tub. I stood in the middle of the suite for several minutes, just looking. It seemed unreal. 24 hours ago, I was sleeping on a park bench. Now I was in a room that cost $300 a night. The first thing I did was take a bath. I filled the tub with hot water to the brim and submerged myself completely. The water turned dark with weeks of grime. I scrubbed my skin until it hurt. I washed my hair 3 times. I eliminated every trace of the street from my body. When I got out, I wrapped myself in a white robe that hung behind the door. It was so soft it almost made me cry again. I ordered room service: soup, freshly baked bread, roasted chicken, salad, dessert. When the food arrived on a cart with a white tablecloth, I sat and ate slowly, savoring every bite. It wasn't just food. It was dignity. It was power. It was proof that I still existed as something more than a shadow. That night I slept 12 hours straight. I slept without being startled, without fear, without cold. When I woke up, the sun streamed through the curtains, and for a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then everything came back: the documents, the money, the properties, my new reality. Over the next few days, Avery took me to see each of my properties: apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even a small shopping center on the south side. Each place represented years of Wallace's quiet work, investments made with patience and vision. He explained how everything worked: the rental contracts, the maintenance, the monthly income. I listened and took notes like a dedicated student. The net income from all your properties totals approximately $45,000 a month, Avery told me one day as we reviewed reports in his office. After taxes and maintenance expenses, you're looking at an annual income of around $400,000. That was without touching the principal capital, $400,000 a year, and I had been begging for a bowl of soup at the church. The irony was still brutal, but now there was something more. A plan was forming in my mind, a cold, calculated, patient plan. Avery, I need us to make some changes, I told him one afternoon, but I need them to be done discreetly, without anyone knowing I'm the one behind it. He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. What kind of changes? First, the building on Magnolia Avenue. I want to raise my son's rent to the market price, as we discussed, but I also want you to review all the other contracts in that building. If there are other special arrangements, reduced prices, or favors being granted, I want everything returned to normal rates. Everyone. I want that building to operate as a real business, not a charity organization. Avery nodded and took notes. It can be done. Something else. I want to buy new clothes. I want to change my appearance, and I want a commercial name, something I can use to sign documents, to appear on contracts. I don't want anyone to know that Eleanor Sterling is the owner of all this. We can create a legal entity, an LLC. We choose the name, and all documents are signed under that name. You will be the silent beneficiary. It's perfectly legal and very common in the real estate sector. Perfect. Call it Mendoza Enterprises. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed. I went to hair salons where they cut and colored my hair, covering the gray with an elegant chestnut brown. I went to boutiques where attentive staff helped me choose clothes that fit well and made me look like the woman of means I now was. Pearl gray dresses, pantsuits in earth tones, silk blouses in deep green. Nothing flashy, everything classy. I bought new glasses with modern frames. I got a manicure. I learned to use a little makeup to cover the deeper wrinkles. I wasn't becoming someone else. I was finding the Eleanor who had been buried beneath years of silent servitude. Avery taught me how to review financial reports, understand statements, and make business decisions. I learned quickly, discovering a part of me that had never had the opportunity to develop. I had spent 50 years cooking and cleaning, but my mind was still sharp, capable, and hungry for knowledge. You have a talent for this, Avery told me one day. Your husband chose his investments well, but you have an instinct for spotting opportunities. It comes naturally to you. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it always had. But no one had ever given me the chance to discover it. Wallace had been a good man, a loving husband, but even he had kept me ignorant about the finances, believing he was protecting me. Now I understood that true power didn't come from being protected, but from having the tools to protect myself. The rent increase notifications were sent to all the tenants in the Magnolia Avenue building, signed by Mendoza Enterprises, legally represented by the Hayes and Associates law firm. The increases were justified. They were within legal limits, but they were significant, especially for those who had been paying reduced rates for years. Avery informed me of the reactions. Some tenants called furiously. Others tried to negotiate. "There's one apartment in particular that has called 7 times, he told me one afternoon. 301. A Marcus Sterling says he has a special contract with the previous owner, that this must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I replied calmly. "Tell him the special contract expired with the death of Mr. Wallace Sterling. Now he must pay the full rate or vacate." "He's asking to speak to the owner directly." "Tell him the owner is unavailable. All communications must go through you." Days passed. Avery kept me informed. "Mr. Sterling is trying to get a loan to cover the new rent amount. Apparently he and his wife are living beyond their means. They have credit card debt, a car payment. The rent increase is putting significant pressure on their finances." "Good." The word came out cold, emotionless. I didn't feel satisfied exactly, but I didn't feel guilty either. I was watching the natural consequences of the decisions Marcus had made. He had chosen a wife who spent more than they earned. He had chosen to live in luxury that he could only afford thanks to his father's generosity. He had chosen to kick his mother onto the street. Now he was seeing the price of those choices. But I wasn't finished. There were other strings to pull, other levers to move. Tiffany worked as an independent consultant from home. I did a little digging using resources Avery provided. I discovered that one of her primary clients rented space in another one of my properties, the shopping center on the south side. "Avery, this client who rents Unit 203 in Sunstone Plaza, how much do they pay?" He checked his files. $2,200 a month. It's a large space, a good business. They always pay on time." "Increase their rent to $3,500. "That's a very significant increase, Mrs. Sterling. They might decide to move." "Then let them move. It's my property, and I want to charge what it's worth." The client in Unit 203 did not move, but they did cut expenses. One of the first things they cut was contracts with external consultants, including Tiffany. Avery informed me almost casually during one of our weekly meetings. "By the way, it seems your strategy is having side effects. The business at Sunstone Plaza canceled several vendor contracts. One of them was with Tiffany Sterling, your daughter-in-law." I didn't say anything, just nodded and continued reviewing other documents. But inside, I felt something akin to satisfaction. It wasn't revenge yet. It was justice. It was the universe readjusting, stripping away unearned privileges, balancing the scales. The weeks passed. I continued living in the hotel, studying, learning, transforming. I signed up for yoga classes in the mornings, not because I needed the exercise, though that helped too, but because I needed to learn to be silent with myself, to breathe, to exist without the constant noise of serving others. I also started writing. I bought a brown leather notebook and an elegant pen, and I wrote every night before sleeping. Not exactly a diary, but reflections, thoughts about who I had been, who I was now, who I wanted to be. I wrote about Wallace, about our years together, about the things I never told him. I wrote about Marcus, about motherhood, about how love is sometimes not enough. One afternoon, while having coffee on the hotel terrace, an older woman sat down at the table next to mine. She must have been in her 80s, maybe more, with perfectly styled white hair and sharp blue eyes. "Excuse me for bothering you," she said in a soft voice, "but I've seen you here several times, always writing, always alone, and you remind me of myself a few years ago." I smiled politely, expecting a sales pitch or a sermon, but she just continued. "I also went through a transformation late in life. After my husband died, I discovered I didn't know who I was without him. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but never just myself, so I had to learn it. Is that your case too?" "Something like that," I admitted. "The hard part isn't discovering who you are, she said, looking toward the horizon. "The hard part is giving yourself permission to be that person, especially when the person you discover isn't who everyone else expects you to be." She looked directly at me. "But it's worth it, completely worth it." She stood up, patted my shoulder, and left. I never knew her name, never saw her again, but her words stayed with me, resonating somewhere deep down. She was right. The hard part wasn't discovering who Eleanor was without Wallace, without Marcus, without the role of sacrificing mother. The hard part was giving myself permission to be that person. A person who charged what she was worth, a person who didn't forgive automatically, a person who set boundaries and enforced them. The eviction process advanced relentlessly. Avery sent me updates every other day. Marcus had hired a cheap attorney who tried to find technicalities to delay the inevitable. They argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that certain protocols hadn't been followed, that they deserved more time. But Avery had done everything by the book. Every document was in order. Every notification had been correctly delivered. There was no escape. "The eviction hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," Avery informed me one afternoon. "It's a formality. With the documentation we have, the judge will rule in our favor. Your son will have to vacate within a maximum of 10 days after the ruling." "I'll be there," I said suddenly. Avery raised his eyebrows, surprised. "At the hearing?" "It's not necessary, Mrs. Sterling. I can represent you completely. In fact, it's better if you're not present. It maintains your anonymity." "I want to be there, in the room, but not as a party involved, just as an observer." "That can be done." He thought for a moment. "Eviction hearings are public. Anyone can enter and sit in the back benches. As long as they don't recognize you, there's no problem." Thursday arrived under a gray sky that threatened rain. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark gray pantsuit and a silk blouse in an ivory tone. I put my hair up in a low bun, put on my new glasses, and applied subtle but definitive makeup. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman Marcus wouldn't recognize. I was no longer the bent-over mother cooking soup in his kitchen. I was someone else, someone stronger. The courthouse was an old building with halls that smelled of ancient paper and stale coffee. I arrived early and sat in the last row of courtroom 3, where the hearing would take place. There were other people waiting for their own cases, all with that look of anxiety and exhaustion that the legal system produces. Marcus arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time. He came with Tiffany and their attorney, a young man in a suit that had seen better days. My son looked terrible. He had lost weight. He had dark circles under his eyes. His hair was messy. Tiffany, on the other hand, was perfectly put together, in an emerald green dress too elegant for a courtroom, high heels, impeccable makeup. But her expression was one of barely contained fury. They sat in the front row, their backs to me. I watched them as one watches a distant, analytical play. Tiffany whispered things into Marcus's ear, making sharp gestures, clearly upset. He just nodded, defeated, without the energy to argue. Their lawyer reviewed papers with a worried look. Avery arrived exactly on time, immaculate in his black suit, leather briefcases in hand. He didn't look at me, just as we had agreed. He sat on the other side, organized, confident. He knew his job and knew he had a solid case. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a stern expression and efficient movements. "Case number 3478, Mendoza Enterprises versus Marcus Sterling," the clerk announced. Marcus's lawyer stood up first. He argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that his client had lived in the apartment for 5 years with a good payment history, and that he deserved special consideration. His voice sounded unconvincing, even to himself. He knew he was losing. Avery stood up calmly, presented the documents, the original contract, the increased notifications, the late payment notices, all perfectly organized. He explained that the special contract had been a courtesy of the previous owner, now deceased, and that the new management had decided to normalize all rents to market price, which was completely legal and completely justified. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Avery continued, The defendant not only refused to pay the new rent amount, but accumulated 2 months of delinquency. He paid under pressure of eviction on one occasion, but immediately fell into arrears again. This demonstrates a pattern of inability or unwillingness to comply with his contractual obligations. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Sterling, is it correct that you currently owe 2 months of rent under the new terms?" Marcus stood up with difficulty. "Yes, Your Honor, but the increase was so sudden. We didn't have time to adjust. If you could give us an extension, just 3 months for—" "Mr. Sterling," the judge interrupted in a firm tone, "you were notified 30 days in advance of the change in terms, which is what the law requires. Did you have sufficient time to adjust or find another place? Do you have the owed money right now?" Marcus looked at his lawyer, then at Tiffany, then at the floor. "No, Your Honor, not at this moment." "Then I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Sterling, you have 10 days to vacate the property. If you do not do so voluntarily, forced eviction will proceed. Next case." The gavel hit the table. It was all over in less than 20 minutes. Marcus remained paralyzed in his spot, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Tiffany exploded. "This is unfair! You can't do this! We have rights!" she yelled toward the judge, but it was too late. The next case was being announced. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to usher her out of the courtroom before she was cited for contempt. Tiffany resisted, shouting incoherent things about corruption and abuse. Marcus followed her in silence, dragging his feet, the image of defeat itself. They walked past my bench without looking at me. I was just another person in the room, invisible, irrelevant. I followed them with my gaze until they left. Then I sat for a few more minutes, letting the reality sink in. I had won legally. Formally, I had won. But I didn't feel the euphoria I expected, only a kind of emptiness, like the calm after a storm. I left the courthouse through a side door. Avery had told me he would wait for me at a nearby cafe. I found him at a table in the back, where 2 cups of coffee were already waiting. "Well," he said when I sat down, "it went exactly as we planned." "Yes." "How do you feel?" I thought about the question. How did I feel? "Strange," I finally admitted. "Like I've closed a door, but I still don't know what's on the other side." Avery nodded with understanding. "What you did today wasn't cruel, Mrs. Sterling. It was simply fair. Your son made decisions that led him here. You simply let him face the natural consequences of those decisions." "I know. Rationally, I know, but—" "He's still your son," he finished. "That never changes, even when they change." We drank coffee in silence. Avery didn't push me to talk more. He was good at that, knowing when silence was more useful than words. After a while, he pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I have to show you something. A request came in this morning from one of your other tenants in the Magnolia building." I opened the folder. It was a handwritten letter addressed to Mendoza Enterprises. It was from a woman named Martha Gonzalez, tenant of apartment 105. She explained that she was a single mother with 2 children, that she worked as a nurse on the night shift, and that she had always paid her rent on time. She respectfully requested if it was possible to reconsider the rent increase in her case, or at least stagger the increase over several months. She attached copies of her pay stubs, income verification, and reference letters from her employer. I read the letter twice. "What do you think?" I asked Avery. "It's your decision. Legally, you are not obliged to make exceptions, but this woman seems genuine, and she has an impeccable payment history." I thought of Martha Gonzalez, whom I didn't know, working night shifts to support her children. I thought of how many times I had been in her position, begging for a little consideration, a little grace. Accept her proposal, stagger the increase over 6 months, and tell her that if she continues to pay on time, we will consider keeping her rent permanently below market value. Avery smiled slightly. "That is very generous." "It's not generosity. It's recognizing the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and someone who is just evading responsibility. I signed the approval right there. It was a line I had decided to draw. I would be tough on those who had hurt me, on those who abused unearned privileges, but I wouldn't become the kind of person who ignores real suffering. I wouldn't become Tiffany. The following days were tense. Avery informed me of Marcus's desperate attempts to reverse the decision. He had appealed the ruling, which only delayed things for one more week. He had tried to get additional loans, but his credit was already destroyed. He had placed ads selling furniture, electronics, anything of value. The appeal was rejected in 3 days. The appeals judge didn't even require a hearing. He just reviewed the documents and confirmed the original ruling. Marcus now had less than 1 week to vacate. According to the private investigator who was still monitoring the situation, my son and Tiffany had started packing, but the arguments between them had intensified dramatically. Neighbors report shouting every night, the investigator informed me over the phone. Yesterday, Mrs. Sterling left the building with 2 suitcases and took a cab. She hasn't returned. Apparently, she's staying with a friend. And Marcus, he's still there, just packing. One of the neighbors says they saw him crying in the hallway last night while carrying boxes to the elevator. The image hurt more than I expected. My son, alone, crying while packing the remnants of his life. But I didn't call. I didn't intervene. This had to happen. He needed this breaking point. I couldn't keep rescuing him. 2 days before the eviction deadline, Avery received an unexpected call. It was Marcus, he told me when we met that afternoon. He wants to talk to the owner of the building. He says he has something important to say. He's begging for a meeting. What did you tell him? That I would pass on the message. Do you want to see him? The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to see my son. I wanted to hear what he had to say. One part of me, the part that never stopped being a mother, screamed yes, but the other part, the wiser part, had doubts. Do you know what he wants to say? No, just that it's important, that he needs to explain something. I thought for a long minute. Tell him I will agree to see him, but not as his mother, as the representative of Mendoza Enterprises, and it has to be on neutral ground, in your office, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Avery nodded. Do you want me to be present? No. I have to do this alone. That night, I didn't sleep. I mentally rehearsed what I would say, how I would react. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced keeping my expression neutral, firm, without betraying emotion. I had to be strong. I couldn't let Marcus see the mother desperate for his love. He had to see the business owner I now was. At 2:30 p.m. the next day, I arrived at the law firm. Avery had allowed me to use his private office. I sat behind the desk in the black leather chair with the case documents in front of me. I had dressed impeccably. A charcoal gray pantsuit, a cream-colored blouse, my hair perfectly styled, subtle but definitive makeup. I didn't look like Eleanor. I looked like Mrs. Mendoza. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard voices at the reception desk. My heart started beating faster. The door opened, and Marcus walked in, alone. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. For an infinite moment, we stared at each other in silence. I watched his brain process what his eyes were seeing. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, absolute shock. "Mom," he whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "Sit down, Marcus." My voice came out cold, controlled. It wasn't a mother's voice. It was an owner's voice. He stumbled toward the chair across the desk, unable to tear his gaze away from me. I don't understand. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like this? Where have you been? I looked for you, Mom. I called you. I sent you messages." "That's a lie." The words sliced the air like a knife. "I checked my messages. 0 calls. 0 messages. After you kicked me out of your house, you never contacted me again." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes filled with tears. Tiffany said it was better to give you space, that you were angry, that with time... Tiffany said, I repeated, my tone icy. "Marcus, since when did you let your wife make decisions about your relationship with your mother? It wasn't like that. The money was tight. The work was stressful. Tiffany was stressed, and it was easier to forget about me than to deal with your wife." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He lowered his gaze, unable to deny it. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Marcus looked up, and I saw something different in his eyes, a question taking shape. "Mom, what are you doing here? In this office, dressed like this? Why did the lawyer let you use his office?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment. "I'm not using his office, Marcus. He lent it to me because I am his client. I am Mendoza Enterprises." The color drained from his face. "What?" "The building where you live. The other 12 buildings in this city. The investments, the money, it's all mine. Your father left it to me. It was always mine, and you've been paying rent to live in my property." Marcus stood up so fast the chair almost fell over. No, that's not true. Dad never mentioned. Why didn't you say anything?" "Why would I have said anything?" My voice rose slightly, allowing a little of the contained anger to surface. "So you and Tiffany could treat me like your landlord, on top of your housekeeper? So you could ask for more favors, more discounts, more special considerations?" "We didn't know," he shouted. "If we had known that you—" "What?" I interrupted, standing up as well. "You would have treated me better? You would have respected me more? Marcus, respect shouldn't depend on how much money someone has. I was your mother. That should have been enough." He fell back into the chair, his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. He was crying. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was a coward. I let Tiffany treat you badly. I let her kick you out. I turned up the TV when she was hurting you because I didn't want to confront her, because it was easier to sacrifice you than risk my marriage." The words I had waited months to hear had finally come out of his mouth, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I just felt tired. "And now, Marcus, you're only sorry because you discovered I have money, because I own the building where you live. Would you have come to apologize if you still thought I was a poor old woman with no resources?" He looked up, his face soaked with tears. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice broken. "I don't know, Mom, and that's the worst part. I don't know what kind of person I became. I don't recognize the man who did those things, who left his mother on the street, who chose comfort over decency." At least he was honest. That was something. I sat down again, feeling calmer. "Your marriage is falling apart, isn't it?" He nodded miserably. "Tiffany left 3 days ago. She says she's not staying with a loser who can't even pay the rent. She says she deserves better, that this is all my fault." "And what do you think?" "I think she's right. I think I'm a loser. I lost my job 2 weeks ago. I was fired for constantly being late, for being distracted, for the stress. I have debts of over $50,000. My credit is ruined, and in 2 days, I'm going to be homeless." He laughed bitterly. "Irony, huh? I left you homeless, and now I'm in the same situation." "It's not irony," I said softly. "It's karma." He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Did you come here to watch me suffer? Is that what you wanted? Revenge?" The question stopped me. Was that what I wanted? I had spent weeks moving pieces, pulling strings, applying pressure. I had watched my son fall apart piece by piece, and now that he was here in front of me, completely broken, I felt satisfied. "No," I finally said, surprised by my own answer. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be discarded, ignored, treated as if you were worthless. I wanted you to hit rock bottom so you could start rebuilding correctly." "And did I?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Did I hit rock bottom? What do you think?" He thought for a long moment. "I think so. I don't think I can fall any lower than I am right now. No job, no wife, no money, no home, no dignity, no you." The last 2 words came out as a ragged whisper. I remained silent, letting his words hang between us. Marcus had hit bottom. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped, in how his hands trembled on his knees. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment my son finally understood the weight of his actions. "Do you know what the worst part of all of it was, Marcus?" I finally said. "It wasn't the blow with the ladle. It wasn't sleeping on the street. It wasn't searching for food in the trash. It was the sound of the television volume turning up. It was knowing that my own son heard me cry out in pain and chose to do nothing. He sobbed, covering his face with his hands. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. If I could turn back time. But you can't, I interrupted. No one can. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left. Marcus looked up, hope and fear mixed in his expression. What? What's going to happen now? I leaned back in the chair, studying him. My son, the baby I had carried in my arms, the child who ran to me when he fell, the teenager who hugged me before leaving for college. All of that was still there, buried beneath bad decisions and cowardice. But there was also the man who had betrayed me. Both versions were real. The eviction proceeds, I said firmly. I am not canceling it. You need to get out of that apartment. You need to leave that life behind. His face crumpled. I understand. I have no right to ask you for anything. I can only ask one thing. Where were you all those months? How did you survive before you found out about the properties? I told him, not everything, but enough. The nights in the park, the hunger, the cold, the vending machine that swallowed my last few dollars. Every word was a dart that I watched embed in him. He needed to hear it. He needed to understand the full cost of his abandonment. When I finished, Marcus was crying openly, not trying to hide it. I failed you in the worst way possible. Dad must be ashamed of me. Wherever he is, he must hate me for what I did to you. Your father loved you, I said softly, even when you made mistakes. But he also knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. That's why he built this legacy for me, so I would have the resources to defend myself if I ever needed to. Will you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air. The truth was, I didn't know. I don't know, Marcus. Forgiveness isn't something I can force. It's not a switch I flip because you finally apologized. It's a process, and first, I need to see real change, not just pretty words born of desperation. He nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. What can I do? How can I show you I've changed? It's not about showing me anything. It's about becoming the man you want to be, the man your father would have been proud to call his son. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You have 2 days to vacate. Use that time wisely. Marcus stood up slowly, as if every movement cost him enormous effort. At the door, he stopped and turned around. Mom, one last thing. When I find a place to stay, when I get my life together, can I call you just to know you're okay? I thought about my answer carefully. You can try, but I don't guarantee I'll answer. Not until I see action, not just words. He nodded, accepting the terms. Thank you for seeing me, for listening to me. I know I didn't deserve it. And he left. I stayed alone in the office, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It hadn't been the explosive confrontation I might have imagined. There were no screams or dramatic rejections, just the cold, hard truth served on a platter of inevitable consequences. I spent the following days in a kind of emotional limbo. Avery informed me that Marcus had vacated the apartment one day before the deadline. He had left the place clean, the keys properly handed over. According to the building manager, he had left in a cab with only 3 suitcases and an expression of total defeat. Do you know where he went? I asked, hating myself for asking. No, ma'am. He didn't say. Part of me wanted to investigate, to find out where he was, to make sure he at least had a roof over his head, but I stopped myself. Marcus was an adult. He needed to solve this on his own. I couldn't keep rescuing him. Tiffany, for her part, had completely disappeared. According to my sources, she had moved back in with her parents in another city, blaming Marcus for everything. She had posted things on social media about weak men and wasted time, but she never mentioned her own role in the disaster. Typical. With the apartment vacant, I decided to make changes. I hired a designer, and we completely renovated the space. New floors, fresh paint, modern appliances. Apartment 301 became the jewel of the building, I rented it out in less than 1 week to a young professional for $3,000 a month. But the building wasn't the only thing that needed renovation. I also decided it was time to leave the hotel and create a real home. I chose one of my properties, a small house in a quiet neighborhood with a south-facing garden. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with large windows, and a wooden deck perfect for morning tea. I spent weeks decorating it. I didn't hire designers. This time, I wanted to do it myself. I chose simple but elegant furniture. I hung photographs of Wallace in the living room, but I also left space for new memories. I planted roses in the garden, tomatoes in pots, and aromatic herbs next to the kitchen window. I enrolled in painting classes at a nearby community center. It turned out I wasn't terrible. My first attempts were disastrous, blobs of color without shape or meaning. But over time, I started creating things I liked. Simple landscapes, still lifes, self-portraits that captured the person I was becoming. I also started volunteering at the shelter I had tried to visit that terrible night when I had nowhere to go. I served food twice a week. I listened to the stories of other unhoused people, understanding that each one had their own path to desperation. I donated generously, but I also gave something more valuable, my time and my empathy. One afternoon, while serving soup, I recognized someone. It was the man who had offered me bread that night in the park. He looked cleaner now, more hopeful. "Grandma," he said, surprised. "It's you. You look different." "I am," I replied, smiling. I found myself. 3 months passed without news from Marcus. He didn't call. He didn't write. Part of me was relieved. Another part felt his absence like a wound that wouldn't close, but I kept going. I continued building my life, discovering who Eleanor was beyond being a mother, a wife, a shadow. Then, one Saturday morning, while I was watering the roses, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, Mom?" Marcus's voice, but different, firmer. "It's me. I know you said you might not answer, but I needed to try." My heart beat faster. "Where are you?" "In a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a studio, but it's mine. I pay for it with my new job. I'm working in a warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I'm paying off my debts little by little." I felt something loosen in my chest. "I'm glad to hear that." "Mom, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I go to therapy every week. I'm working on understanding why I made the decisions I made, why I let Tiffany turn me into someone I don't recognize." "That's good, Marcus, really good." There was a pause. "Do you think that someday maybe we could grab a coffee? It doesn't have to be soon. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready." I looked at the roses I had planted, now blooming in shades of coral and yellow. I looked at the house I had turned into my sanctuary. I looked at the life I had built from the ashes. "Maybe," I finally said. "Someday, when we are both ready." "Okay, I can wait. I've learned to be patient." His voice cracked slightly. "I love you, Mom. I know I don't have the right to say it after everything, but it's true." "I know," I whispered, and I hung up. I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, letting the morning sun warm my face. I hadn't forgiven Marcus completely. Maybe I never would entirely, but there was something more important than forgiveness. I had found peace. I had found my strength. I had found my voice. I pulled out my notebook and wrote. I learned to forgive myself for waiting so long to defend myself. I learned that self-love is not selfishness. It is survival. It is dignity. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The wind moved the leaves of the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. And I, Eleanor Sterling, 71 years old, owner of 13 buildings, survivor of betrayal and abandonment, a woman reborn from her own ashes, simply existed, complete, free, and utterly mine. Sometimes life breaks you apart just to rebuild you stronger. I thought I'd lost everything, my home, my son, my purpose. But now I see I didn't lose myself. I found her. The woman who can stand tall, alone, and still smile. If you're listening to me now, please remember this. No one has the right to decide your worth. Not your family, not your past, not your pain. Only you do. When you feel invisible, when the people you love turn away, don't let bitterness take root. Take a deep breath, pick up what's left of your heart, and rebuild, because you can. I did, and trust me, the peace that comes after pain is worth every tear you've cried. So if my story touched you, maybe it's because somewhere inside you've carried the same kind of silence, the same kind of strength. And if you're standing at your lowest point right now, let this be your sign. You're not done yet. Your story can still bloom. If you agree with me and liked my story, show it by giving the video a like. Let's see how many of us are here. I'm curious. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Write it in the comments. And if you'd like to support me on my journey, you can send a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this one, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, there are 2 new stories I'm sure you'll love. Click one and start listening now. With love.